Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. You're very welcome, and we are pleased to be supporting Dufrain on their AI Beyond Blind Trust series, bringing together female leaders to share their insight and experiences and to kick off the discussion around responsible AI. This session today is supported by Scottish Financial Enterprise, and it's great to see that a number of SFE members are joining us today for the discussion. I'm David Reed, the Chief Knowledge Officer at DataIQ, and I'm going to be hosting this session. Pleased to get the most out of this. Do engage with us via the Q&A function, which you should see in your control ribbon. We'll be picking up those questions at the end. If we don't get through all of them, we will get back to you offline. Now, DataIQ recently ran some research on this very topic, so I know how relevant this discussion is to leaders. We are seeing the confluence of two trends from the individuals we recognize in the DataIQ 100, that AI is moving from ambition to accountability, and that data leaders are now operating at the enterprise level. And that makes responsible AI not just a technical issue, it's a leadership, governance, and cultural priority. And importantly, diverse perspectives, especially including the voices of women leading in data and AI, plays a critical role. So I am delighted to be joined by our speakers today, and I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, beginning, if I may, with you, Karen.
Thanks, David. Hello, everybody. I'm Karen Dewar, and I am the Chief Data and Analytics Officer here at NatWest.
Thank you, Karen. Carol.
Morning, everybody. Carol Roberts. I know we've got a Karen and a Carol just to help today. I'm Director of Technology and Data at Leeds Building Society.
Great to have you here. And Isabel.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm Isabel Daly, and I'm Head of AI at Dufrain.
Welcome. So let's get started and think about this challenge of moving from experimentation, proof of concept into production. There was a lot of coverage given last year to a research study by MIT that claimed that something like 95% of AI projects weren't actually getting beyond proof of concept. So why is it, do we think, that so many AI initiatives stall at that stage? And what is it that needs to be true for something to make it into production? Isabel, you lead on this. Perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I should say, I think there was obviously a big noise around, I think, that number of 95% of AI use cases not make it to production. And I think in 2026, I think we're starting to move beyond that, which is great. But a lot of the reasons that proof of concepts end up getting stuck, there are quite a few reasons. I think the first is it's often a technical skills gap. So the skills required to develop a proof of concept don't necessarily match the skills required to take something to production. There are so many different elements to think about when taking something to production: the infrastructure, the monitoring and evaluation, the organizational change, managing change with customers. It's a significant piece of effort. And then there's the fact that the way in which a system behaves on a small scale is often very different to how it behaves when it's scaled. That can be due to limited scenarios that are kind of used for testing for a proof of concept stage. And then suddenly you get into kind of real production, all these like edge cases that you haven't had to think about, but actually now, in order to get something to work properly and ensure it is safe, you do need to think about all of those edge cases. And then, very relevant to the topic that we're talking about today, there can be some big obstacles to overcome in relation to risk, governance, monitoring and evaluation, and answering that question: what happens if it goes wrong? Often organisations are kind of putting in AI governance frameworks as they go when taking these use cases into production, and that means there's quite a long journey to go on to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the risk and it's properly evaluated, and comfortable with who owns that risk as well and what happens when it goes wrong. But I think there's lots of things that organisations can do to move along on that journey and make sure they're getting beyond proof of concept. First thing is starting with low complexity, low risk use cases, often those internal facing use cases as well, that you can use to start to build out all of the adjacent kind of skills and services and frameworks you need in order to get something to production, deliver those simpler use cases to production, building out the governance, monitoring, evaluation frameworks as you go, and then iterate back around with increasingly more complex use cases, but building on those same frameworks. I think that can really accelerate the journey to kind of get into production.
It does feel like that requires a little bit of patience, and I know organizations have been very keen to land their AI strategies and make them live. Karen, NatWest Group, you've been on this journey for several years now. So what is it that changes when you do start moving from that experimentation phase to actually building out AI that's a repeatable capability in a large and highly regulated organization like yours?
Thanks, David. And actually, a lot of what Isabel's just described really resonates with me. So I think we've been on a bit of a journey. In 2024, we were really looking at exploring the kind of use cases and the power of generative AI and where we felt comfortable and confident that it could help deliver customer outcomes. And actually, in that phase of exploration, we were very keen to very quickly try a lot of things and work out what does and doesn't work. Exactly at that mindset of failing and failing fast, entirely prized. As we moved into 2025, we really were kind of starting to create the foundations for adoption. So we started to work on, almost identical to Isabel's experience, we started to work on what are the standard patterns that we're really comfortable and confident in that we can actually start to make more widely available. So really building those foundations, making sure the enablers were in place. And now in 2026, we're moving towards a kind of AI-powered bank, increasingly looking at agentic as our direction. And in two themes really, one around efficiency, so actually where we can use AI on large sets of data to give us really simple and robust predictive outcomes, but also on innovation. So how can we reconceive what customer experience might look like, or how can we reconceive how we power up those team members who directly serve our customers, and that's really exciting. But that means that we're now treating AI as an enterprise capability. So just like software, where your operating model matters as much as the technology. So we're building a team of teams approach across the bank, where we have shared patterns, platforms, and almost, forgive me, commodity AI components that we believe absolutely everyone can use so quickly. And then our experts can stay focused on genuinely new complex problems rather than repeating the basics into some of our customer journeys. And because this only works at scale with the right foundations, we're modernising our cloud and data estate. We've rolled out Gen AI tools to almost all colleagues and embedded responsible AI guardrails so we can run at this with scale and pace and innovation, but with confidence as well.
Well, it's interesting to hear that already cloud was the big thing, 5-6 years ago, and now you're already modernizing that. That tells you something about the pace of change. And I just wonder, is there much tension between that sort of innovative space, the never done before, versus that commodity space, the repeating patterns?
I don't know if I would call it a tension. The thing that keeps me awake at night, David, is really exactly in line with your introduction. So it's not just about the technology, it is a leadership, governance and cultural change. So it's around continuing to work with the organisation more broadly and leadership specifically to get a knowledge and understanding of how we could reconceive client experience. So actually having people with the great ideas are the people who serve our customers every day, and ensuring that we bring them into, well, how could we do it? This is something that you could do this way. We could entirely reorder a journey in order to kind of drive that innovation. So I would really say it's kind of education awareness that will unlock the innovation. Yeah,
that's a really, really good note to make. Thank you for that. Okay, so Carol, Leeds Building Society, you're a mutual member-owned, member-led. So how does your adoption of AI look? Are you seeing some of those same blockers from moving out of pilot into production? And if you manage to get past them, is there a bit of practical advice you might be able to share?
Yeah, and a lot of the same challenges, I guess, we're all obviously as financial services regulated in the same ways to the same degree. I think I'd echo some of the points that both Karen and Isabel have made. One of the blockers, certainly within organisations, is that need to make sure the close adjacent skills and capabilities are in place, whether that's the right data controls, data access, but also things like IT security. We're opening up a whole new world of connectors and things here, and making sure those capabilities have been invested in at the same rate and to the same scale as the AI skills themselves is one of the most critical things, I think, in terms of blockers. I think, as well as Isabel mentioned earlier, what we are seeing is AI governance is being developed to meet the emerging use case, and then it's being evolved and iterated and evolved, rather than let's sit in a room and design all the governance we may ever need in the future around AI. It's moving too fast to make that even kind of practical and applicable. But what that does is it does add some natural friction at the point when that use case is ready, because the governance is still kind of emerging and evolving. And I think for us, it's things like, rather than think too specifically about that particular use case, what is the category we could wrap around that? So, for example, is this an agent that does retrieval only? And actually the governance we put in place can then be reusable for all other types of use case rather than this specific one. So how do we think a bit wider and a bit further ahead without sort of disappearing into a room for a year and coming out with some governance that may or may not be applicable? I think it's also interesting when we talk about failure, and we talk a lot about kind of, I think the general stats in the industry are 20 to 25% often make it into production. I think what's really uncomfortable for us as financial services organisations is that's really unusual, because what we tend to do is sit in a room and we decide we're going to do something. We then launch a project and everybody gets behind it and we invest in it. If that fails, that's a very different feeling and a very different outcome. It feels almost like something has failed to deliver. Whereas actually the whole point of AI is innovation and exploration and being willing to see more failure and the ability to fail fast. But what we need to do is move the governance to the right place. So, for example, how much governance do you need to get into a pilot is not the same thing for the level of governance you may need to get into full production rollout. And if we govern everything too far to the left, what we won't see is the traction that we need on the progress. So I think for me, a lot of the issues are one and the same, and in particular the adoption piece that Karen talked about. We can prove the concept technically, we can prove the value, but a little bit like horses and water, if people are not going to come and adopt it, that value is proven but will never actually materialise. So I think very similar, David.
And just to pick up a point that Isabel was making earlier, Carol, about how when you roll out, it never quite performs the same way as it did in test. I imagine that can sometimes be a challenge, for the governance piece. You start to see, at the edges, things are not quite happening the way you expected.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I think from a few perspectives, really. One is, there's no question in every organisation, I think, that there are people sort of almost waiting for AI to get it wrong. And so when other types of technology or capability may sometimes get it wrong, we're quite forgiving and say, well, this is new. Actually, we've kind of, it's almost got to overprove itself at the moment to kind of prove its worth. And that's a challenge. But I also think it's the recognition that this is different in terms of there is a human in the loop. And as an example, if you're rolling something out in agentic AI that requires prompts, often, I won't say the majority of the time, I'll say often, it's the prompt that has generated a response different to one you expected, as opposed to the response itself maybe being a little bit. So this has to go hand in glove with that learning, with the development, making sure prompt engineering becomes a thing, and the recognition that it's as much about the question that you ask as it is about the answer that you're going to receive.
Yeah, so that capability and AI literacy piece, I think, is emerging quite strongly as having a big impact. Thank you very much, Carol, for laying that out. And obviously, we're now, into this territory of governance and accountability. So, Karen, if I can come back to you, it's very clear that if we're going to fix where the accountability of AI sits, we need to fix the governance. So, I wonder if you can help us to understand what good AI governance actually looks like in practice. How do you flex that in that process of stepping up from testing that proof to live production?
And I'm keen to start by saying I've clearly not perfected responsible AI governance, but as always, I
It's
find
always a
that
journey, right?
yeah, I'm on a journey. But governance is fundamental, and I kind of would echo Carol's point. We're managing a polarity between going fast and at scale so that our customers benefit from some of the capability that we're able to bring, whilst also paying appropriate attention to the risks caused by probabilistic outcomes, so next best token prediction, which is very different to kind of some of the risks that we've been managing historically. So I think governance really is fundamental, and although AI often dominates conversations, actually governance is the key to making sure that it can be trusted and safe and actually deliver the outcomes that we would all hope. So we kind of take a really simple view. I'll chat a bit about it, which is kind of, can I, should I build it? Now that I've built it, is it working as I intended? And when I put it into production, does it continue to deliver the outcomes that I want? So starting with can I and should I do it, we're trying to bring that to life through our ethical AI assessment, our privacy impact checks, and several tests that every AI initiative must pass before it moves forward. I mean, I'm a Glaswegian, and I was brought up with the saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's a really good start point as we try to bring AI forward to solve kind of customer and operational issues. So it's kind of, why do you need to use AI or generative AI? And where you could use a more deterministic model or technique to reduce the risk, then let's do that. But once it's built, the next question is therefore, is it working as intended? Is it technically sound? Is it explainable? Is it delivering the outcomes we expect without creating any unintended impacts? And then finally, and we would do model validation on kind of anything that we were putting live in this space, and we would be ensuring that we've tested for bias, etc., within that middle section. And then finally, in production, governance becomes real time. So clear live metrics defined upfront and agree exactly what would trigger intervention so that we can adjust, pause, or stop a system if we think that's needed. So at its heart, it's really about disciplined leadership and making sure accountability is unambiguous from day one and in life operation.
Mm. That's an interesting point about intervening if you see something deviated from expected performance. And I wonder who gets the authority to act, because I guess in some cases you might have to devolve that right down if you're customer facing, maybe.
I think that's a great question. So we decide the triggers up front before a system ever goes live. So we've defined the performance, fairness, risk thresholds that we would not be comfortable crossing without review. And then in practice, a pause mechanism is simply a structured way of stopping the system from continuing to operate. And actually the people closest to the risk are the named leaders who oversee that model in real life. So action isn't delayed. It isn't dependent on a long approval chain or a committee. And I know that there's quite emotive language around here, so some people would call it a kill switch, but in reality, it's just disciplined governance that's predefined that helps us intervene early and protect customer, colleague, and bank outcomes.
No doubt a notification on your phone if you are one of those leaders
Yes.
with the accountability.
Yes. Indeed.
Absolutely. Isabel, let's come to you, because it, as Karen said, it is the classic question. It comes up in science all the time, not just whether you can build something, but whether you should build it. So I'm interested to hear how, in the AI programs that Dufrain's been engaged with, you're seeing that question being thought about and playing out.
It's fairly similar to some of the things that Karen described, in that it is starting at the very beginning of a project by asking that big question of should we. I've seen many times people get swept up in the technical art of the possible, because lots of things are technically possible. Spend a lot of time developing something and then get to a point where they actually want to do something with it, and then someone asks the question, should we actually do this? Is this the right thing to do? And actually, that question should be asked at the beginning and throughout, continually questioning, should we? Is this the right thing? Can we deliver this in line with responsible AI principles? So I think that is a key kind of element that everyone should kind of instill into their processes and make sure that question is regularly being asked. I think going back to thinking about whether simpler alternatives exist to actually bring less risk in terms of something going wrong, often, and I think this was probably more a 2024-25 thing, but there was absolutely a tendency to try and answer every question and problem with an LLM, when actually there were loads of like traditional machine learning techniques that are much better suited to certain jobs, but also maybe there were also techniques that don't require any kind of probabilistic anything probabilistic that might be suitable for a particular job. So I think it's really important. I work in AI and I love it, but there are many times when the problem has been brought and actually the answer is not AI, and it sometimes isn't data science either. Alongside those kind of ethical questions, really thinking about the value versus the risk. Does what is being proposed actually deliver business value in some way? Is it enabling efficiency? Is it making customers' lives or employee lives better? Is it enabling innovation, or actually is it just a bit of a gimmick? And being really strict, on defining that value at the beginning, so it can then be also measured throughout. And yeah, testing and evaluation is very different from traditional software. So as you're evaluating whether you should continue doing something once you've started on the train of development, understanding how it's different, understanding that you're testing a probabilistic system, and understanding how do you evaluate that and get to an acceptable level of risk is very important. And crucially, I think talking about failure. Often, failure is often promoted as a good thing, but somehow when it comes to the reality, there's still a reluctance to accept that something hasn't worked. So it's really having the confidence to be willing to kind of pause, stop, pull back on certain developments if they're not working and if they're not meeting kind of acceptable thresholds for risk, and also appreciating that those failures are not just abject failures. They will have come with a lot of learning along the way that will then be applied to the next use case, and will enable faster progress.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it, that in the excitement about the scale and complexity of LLMs, we seem to have forgotten Occam's razor, that the simplest answer is usually the right one. It's not necessarily one that excites people, but it might actually be more effective and certainly more efficient. So Carol, let's come back to you. We've been looking at this question of responsible governance and ethical AI, and of course across your member base it's relatively diverse. So how are you looking at the outcomes from when you deploy AI, making sure that that's safe and indeed fair across all those groups of different members?
It's a really good question, David. It's certainly a challenge that I'd say we're still wrestling with in terms of where and how we use AI. And some of that's to Isabel's point that despite current belief, the answer isn't always AI to what's the question. So for us, we've got a large base of our members who are digitally active, who want frictionless, seamless, in their hand, just self-serve, do what they need to do and get back on with the day. We've also got a large volume of members who absolutely cherish our branch network for a variety of reasons, whether that's because they just prefer the personal kind of contact, they're more familiar with that, etc. But that's all the way through to members who still absolutely cherish their paper passbook, and our members who, for those who recall, passbooks that have become a little bit more scarce in financial services now. They want to literally walk into the branch on an infrequent basis and get the balance printed out in a passbook. And a lot of the time they'll stand and chat with the staff in the branch. They'll often know their kids' names, or sometimes they'll bake a cake and take into the branch, etc. The reality is how we use this next generation of digital capability in a branch network and to service our members who want that very, very human contact at all times, who actually, to some degree, are sometimes becoming a little bit digitally isolated because of the world changing. And we'll have members who go in a branch who say that's really difficult because to pay to park their car now needs an app. So they started coming on the bus, but they've got to use their card to pay on the bus now. And it isn't just about the banking side of things. But we also need to make sure that we don't worry so much about that end of our member base, that we don't move forward and with our digitally active and our digitally curious members to give them what they need. the balancing act across both of those is, but what we can't do is give them different outcomes to those members. And so we need to ensure our members are getting the outcome that they need, but the how we do that needs to be different by cohort, by channel, by member base. And AI is one of the most important things in where and how we can use that tooling. What I would say is for those members who want to be able to come into the branch and have a very human contact, what they do want behind that human contact is frictionless, errorless, streamlined, straight through capability. If somebody, for example, is coming into a branch to discuss a bereavement, we don't want pieces of paper getting lost across that journey. We want it to be as competent, as digital, seamless as possible, but with a human face. And so a key part of this is how do we work out for our members what they need, what they want, and how we interplay both digital capability in the right way, but meet our members' needs when it most matters. And even in our large volume servicing channels such as telephony, the more we can use things like AI to support those colleagues, the more we free them up to have the contact in the moments that matter, where the members need it most, rather than maybe some of the more straightforward conversations where we could use automation to meet the members' needs.
You raise a really interesting point there, and I wondered how difficult you found it to get people to recognize that accessibility, you were talking about, digital, paper, telephone, and the challenges balancing that accessibility can itself be a bias if you exclude people from a channel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the other bias by proxy as well. So, for example, if we get the data inputs to models and model development wrong, whilst we maybe are seeing different patterns by channel, what we inadvertently may be doing is seeing different patterns by age, for example. So even though we're certainly not in a position as either an organisation or a society anymore that, digital is the use of the young, there is more of a skew. It is more likely that that people using a branch have a slightly older demographic or a slightly different demographic. It isn't just about having skews in the way that AI may interpret the interaction and so on in channel, but actually making sure there isn't bias by proxy because of the demographic link and the way that other demographics link into that. I mean, I've got a 20-year-old and he'll do anything other than pick up a phone and speak to somebody. It has to be on an app, and he can't believe we even still use Google, never mind the thought of picking up a phone. But for the people, that will always be their go-to. My 83-year-old dad would pick up a phone 100% of the time. And so if we're not careful, we introduce bias in other groups, whether those are gender bias. We know quite often women are more likely to use branches than men. We know that older people, or a larger proportion of older people, are more likely to use branches. So it isn't just about making sure we're not introducing bias through things like channels, but actually proxy bias because of that demographic interlock and constantly coming back to Isabel's point, coming back all of the time, rechecking, is this still the right thing to do? Ultimately, if you don't give the data to the model, it can't use it. And you need to make sure that we are always in control of what we are making available and the bias or decisions that it makes. I think the critical piece is the recognition that the model is never accountable. Humans are always accountable, and the book will always stop with us, and so it should.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. And Karen, for you, what practical steps do you try to take to make sure that when AI is being trained, the data that's being trained on isn't going to lead to bias in some form?
I'm so pleased that was your question, because actually I would have to confess to Carol and everyone on the call that I only eat in restaurants that you can book online. I absolutely am a fan of the phone, right, just for the record. So I completely agree with the point. Anyway, in terms of practical steps that we take, the first thing I always ask is whether the data genuinely represents the customers and the communities that we serve, because if the starting point is skewed, then the model output will be too. So where we see gaps or over-representation, we use the kind of right sampling approaches to correct for that, so that we're not inadvertently building a bias engine from historical patterns. So during the model's learning process, we would use special methods that help the model treat all groups more fairly. And after the model is learned, we'll check its results and make changes if we need to ensure the decisions it makes are fair for everyone. So for example, we might adjust how confident the model feels about its decisions for different groups to keep things balanced and accurate. So for our technical attendees, so this is all of our weights, our errors, our back propagation that we would deploy. But just coming back to, I think, Carol's human judgment point, beyond the data itself, leaders need to create the conditions where all teams feel confident to challenge results that don't look right. So any issues get surfaced earlier rather than embedded into outcomes and challenged later. So think always around the thing that AI doesn't bring is human judgment. And that is really the most prized asset that we have in ensuring that we've eliminated bias when data is used to build AI systems.
Mm. Yes, absolutely right. And Isabel, really, same question to you. What does bias look like when it shows up in AI outputs, and how do we challenge that before it does have any form of negative impact or harm?
I think bias can show up in lots of different ways in the model. And actually, one of the challenges is being objective and kind of thinking holistically enough in order to spot like different types of bias that might, through your own unconscious bias, kind of pass you by. It's an area, bias in AI is an area that has always been of particular interest to me. I did some research a couple of years ago looking at gender bias in the outputs of LLMs when they were creating marketing content, and actually the results were pretty shocking. But more recently, I've read a paper, or tried to keep up with research in that area. I read a paper recently, I think it was published in Nature towards the end of last year, and that looked at, firstly, at the training material for the model. So looking at it was looking at images and videos that span lots of occupations and social roles on Google Images. And what they found in those images, that women were consistently portrayed as younger than men, even though if you actually look at workforce data, that's not true. There's no real age difference there. And then obviously that data is being used to train the models that we're all consuming. So they then looked at the way that bias showed up in the language models trained using that internet data, and that bias was replicated when they asked, I think they asked ChatGPT to create and evaluate thousands of CVs. Those CVs that were created, they all assumed women were younger, less experienced, and they rated like older male candidates as more qualified. So I think that's a really good example of that kind of training data issue, that it has to be representative, and that has to be thought about. Obviously that's difficult when you're using pre-trained models often, so that you need to think about what you're doing to address that. But that training data then is obviously learned by the AI. The AI then generates outputs that shape human decisions, and then it feeds back into future content. So it's so important that organisations are thinking about how do you measure bias in all different types of dimensions and then mitigate against it. And in terms of how to challenge that, challenge it early and make it a measurement problem, not vibes like, oh, this doesn't feel right problem. Really think about how you're going to measure that the model is fair for the use case and is driving fair outcomes. Secondly, make sure that you've got diverse teams working on the development of these solutions, because so often these things are forgotten about because they're not part of the lived experience of the particular group of people developing that solution. So if you can have a really diverse range of perspectives and life experiences represented in the development team, that you have a much better chance of developing a product that's not going to, or an AI solution that's not going to perpetuate that bias. Make sure that there's representative data and testing, make sure you've got human oversight where it needs to be and where kind of impact is going to be particularly significant, and then make sure that is an ongoing, that monitoring and audit is an ongoing activity. It's not just something that happens at the point of release, but it's something that happens constantly. And then going back to having the confidence to pause or roll back if evidence of bias is then stopped is really important, particularly in those customer facing or high stakes decisions that can really impact people's lives.
Yeah, I think that point you just made about having diversity in teams is really important, because if you don't have representation of groups who might be negatively impacted, you won't catch that in the development process. There won't be that voice saying, yeah, but that wouldn't work for me, or that doesn't look like me, whatever it might be that you're modeling. And to that point, because obviously part of this course, this sequence of Dufrain Beyond Blind Trust webinars is about fostering female talent and encouraging women on their careers in data and AI. I just wonder, Karen and then Carol, if you have a word of advice for any of the women who are tuned in today about what they should consider to progress their careers, whilst we take then a look at the questions that are coming in. If any of you haven't yet posted a question, please do that whilst we hear from Karen first and then Carol.
Thanks, David. My advice to women in data and AI is really to trust the voice you already have, speak up, to take the stretch opportunity. It's a brilliant time. We're moving so quickly through such a lot of innovation. It's absolutely the opportunity to just take a leap. And I think the third thing I would say is back yourself, even when you're stepping into the unknown. None of us are experts because this is continually evolving. So this is exactly the right time to really back yourself and have that confidence. The work we do together shapes how millions of people experience technology, and your perspective isn't just welcomed, it's needed. And especially for leaders, the most powerful thing we can do, completely agree with Carol and Isabel, is build teams that don't all think the same, because diversity isn't like a box to tick. It's actually the engine that challenges blind spots and creates safer, smarter AI for all of our customers. So that would be my chat, David.
Thank you. Carol?
Yeah, the first thing I do is echo Karen's point that we know research says that, you know, if women think they can only do 90% of a job, they don't always push themselves forward. Well, actually, in AI, nobody can do 100% of the job yet. So emerging tech is absolutely a place to take that risk and stretch into, because everybody's on the learning pathway. There's a really famous quote I love about, if nobody gives you a chair at the table, pull up your own seat. And I think that for me, that's absolutely relevant. Sometimes we've got to get our elbows out and put ourselves into those spaces and back ourselves. And I think thirdly, in terms of, and it gets a little bit tiresome, the amount of time we talk about women as needing to kind of role model, but the reality is that is still the world we're in. And I think if you look around the table and think, well, I'm the only female voice here, why is that? Just remember, there's a load of people looking, thinking, wow, there's a woman there. If she can do it, I can. So even if you sometimes wonder why it's just you, the fact there is you there, you are setting the bar and you are clearing the path for those coming after you. So to kind of keep going and as Karen says, value your own voice in that conversation.
Well, and you all three are here and you are doing that, and we appreciate very much that you do represent and you do put yourself forwards. Right, we're going to spend the last 5-6 minutes taking a look at the questions that have come in. One here from Catherine. She's interested to know how you understand where your team's skills are at. Things are moving so fast in this space. How do you ensure that you actually have the right team with the right skills working on the development of your AI? Any thoughts?
Happy to lead off, David. So
thank you.
We run a large team, and one of the things that we've been incredibly passionate about is specifically encouraging the team to take 10% time to review what it is they would like to learn, and then making the resources available to be able to achieve those outcomes. So we worked quite extensively across Data Camp and indeed created our own data academy, not just for the people within data and analytics, the team that I lead, but actually within the bank more broadly. And I think that by continuing to set ambitious goals for what you want to learn and what you're passionate about learning, and also making the resources available to help you do that, we're actually empowering people to get these skills that they know will be crucial to kind of the next chapter within their careers. But the way I then assess is simply by undertaking kind of skills assessment work across each of the teams, and then starting to think strategically, what do I think the mix of skills will be that I need in the next 5 years? But it's not a perfect science, because I fully expect that a number of you will have gone through the kind of hype around, oh, we'll need lots of prompt engineers. No, we won't actually. We just asked the LLM what a good prompt would look like. But actually what we do think we'll need is definitely much more expertise in machine learning engineering, machine learning operations, and starting to think about what are the roles that we have today who might have that skills, and actually how can we start to work to build a greater population of that in the team. So not my crispest answer, but I would say be really clear on what you want to learn and make sure the resources are there for you to go on that journey, underpin yourself, but actually organisationally starting to say kind of 3-5 years out, what do I think I'm going to need, and have I put the plans in place to be able to be full of capacity with that skill.
Well, that actually leads quite nicely into the next question, actually, from Emil. Thank you for this one. He'd like to know what you think the key new skills are going to be for successful professionals in this space, and whether you think that everyone should be able to, effectively build and ship code, for example, and whether that would change the makeup of those project teams. Isabel, let me come to you first, because obviously Dufrain, in supporting your clients, you've got to think about those skills that they are leaning into you to support them with, right?
Absolutely, and I think so that kind of looks to the technical skill set of building these systems, i.e. building and shipping code, and increasingly the barrier to doing that is obviously becoming lower and lower as LLMs can be used to support the creation of that code. And yes, that is important, and I think particularly there's a particular demand and need at the moment for kind of AI engineering skill set. That's not necessarily the kind of traditional data science skill set, which is also still really important. But actually, how do you fit these AI systems together and then make sure all the monitoring and evaluation is place? But I think there was also a real need for AI adjacent skills. So it's not just the tech skills, it's actually understanding how do you embed these very significant changes into an organization from a people and process point of view, which is so often forgotten. Really easy to whip up a prototype with a bit of support from Claude Code. But actually, the hard thing is making that successful by properly embedding that change and helping people adapt to it, and making sure that it's being used in the right way, and making sure the whole process is designed in the right way as well. And then alongside that, there are definitely significant skills needed on the AI governance side. So in order to properly govern AI, you really need a good understanding of how it works and where the risks are and how they can be managed and mitigated. And actually, I think going back to that, I think the first question on why POCs sometimes fail to get to production, that lots of organizations, kind of governance bodies, have had to go on that journey of understanding more about how AI works in order to then know, okay, this is how we can govern it. And I think that is a continuing journey that we need to see a lot more focus on in terms of skills. So yeah, whilst I think the tech skills are really important, and I think there are loads of amazing resources out there to keep up to date and keep evolving those tech skills, I don't think we should forget about all of the adjacent skills that actually then can allow us to embed solutions effectively and in a risk managed way.
Thank you. That point about governance leads us nicely to the next question, which is probably going to need to be our last. And Carol, if you don't mind, I'll come to you on this one, in the hopes this is not a hospital pass, okay? But this is a question from Chris, and he heard you talking about regulation, and he wonders whether you think that credit model validation teams will need to be expanded to cover AI models in order to ensure explainability, etc. I assume regulators are, facing into this right now as they try to understand how you, especially in a regulated sector like financial services, are deploying AI.
Yeah, AI regulation is a really interesting conversation, I think, at the moment. And the UK financial services approach of principle-based pro-innovation does in truth lead to ambiguity and interpretation within organisations, which the intent is to give the freedom to move forward, but arguably being more prescriptive would let people know which box they need to operate in and kind of get on with it without having to kind of pause and reflect. One of the challenges we don't face into that Karen will have to deal with is also the focus beyond the UK domicility. So because European regulation is more prescriptive, we know a lot of financial organisations are almost saying, well, we need to comply with that anyway, so maybe we need to kind of think about that from a guardrails perspective. I think the regulation is, and the ambiguity in it is definitely a challenge. I think the interplay between when is a model And how does your existing model governance in an organisation, particularly to Chris's question, in and around kind of credit models and all the work that's happened over a number of years to get the right rigour in place around models, particularly within credit risk, capital, IRB, provision models, etc. The argument is, when does that need to expand into LLMs? When is the model? What governance do you need in place? What validation, etc.? I think, like many organisations, we're still working through, and some of the recent regulatory changes have been a little bit more prescriptive in that space. But I think with AI, this is a really good example on a micro scale of what we're seeing across the board. What I don't think we're wanting to get to, and I don't know whether Karen would echo or not, is a whole load of new policies about how you govern AI, but it's how AI is woven through the governance and the framework already in existence. So how does AI get thought about in the context of model risk, in the context of people risk, in the context of reputational risk, etc., but actually weaving it through. So at the moment, we're still working through when is a model and how that kind of needs to be interplayed, and how do we balance proportionate, appropriate governance without it becoming another hurdle and a prohibitor to moving at the pace that we need to. So still wrestling with it, but a really, really topical question.
Yeah, well, I'm conscious that we are actually now at time, and there are questions we didn't get to. I'm sure Isabel and the Dufrain team, as well as all of us on the panel, will be very happy to continue this conversation. Connect with us on LinkedIn, and we will carry on this chat. Hopefully today it's given you a chance to check in on how you are scaling AI and the challenges that presents. And I'll leave everyone with the final question to reflect on. Is your organization truly ready to operationalize AI responsibly? Or are there still some gaps in the data foundations, in the governance, or indeed in the leadership alignment that you need to address first? For today, I'd like to thank Karen, Carol and Isabel for all of their insights that they've shared. And for you, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And that's it. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.